wá dẹni àjẹtánà wò fún aráyé. Ó wá sọ mí dayọ̀, mo wá dayọ̀ lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Ọ̀rọ̀ mi dijó, ọ̀rọ̀ mi dijó, ẹ wá bá mi yọ̀, ẹ bá mi dúpẹ́. Ẹ wá bá mi yọ̀ lónìí ayẹyẹ mi. Mo rọ́jú rere Ọlọ́run ògo yẹ ọ́. Ó ṣe Ọlọ́run tó sọ mí dayọ̀ lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Èdùmàrè bá lè ṣe sẹ́ tí mo dìde rí. Gbogbo ayé ni yóò bá mi fìyìn fìjóyìn bàbá. Jákèjádò àgbáyé òkìkí akàn. Jẹ́ kó ṣeé ṣe dáàbò bò mí o. Àwọn tó kù tó bá ń bínú. Jẹ́ kínú wọn rọ̀, jẹ́ kínú wọn rọ̀, ká lè jọ fìdùnnú jayé pẹ́. Bí wọ́n bá wa kọ̀wé gbà wọn ò gbà wá ṣe wọ́n mọ́ṣẹ́. Bí wọ́n ṣe sáàpù ìyá kí wọ́n lè mọ̀ pé wọ́n lọ bá. Bí mo bá ṣeré lọ́wọ́. Ìfẹ́lẹ́ bí mo bá jọlù. Bí mo bá jọlù inú mi àdùn ara mi àyà gágá. Ó ṣe Ọlọ́run tó sọ mí dayọ̀ lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Bá a ṣe ń lùlù yìí. Bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń jó. Bá a ṣe ń lùlù yìí. Bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń jó. Ikú ò ní pa wá o. Àrùn ò ní ṣe yín o. Àjọ la ṣe pẹ́pẹ́pẹ́pẹ́. Ayéfẹ́lẹ́ tún ti dé, àlùjọ tún ti dé. Bóyá wá kájọ ọjọ́ ìlú lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Hypertension ló lè ráyè bílù bá ní. Àlùjọ pọ̀ nínú ìlú mi ẹ̀ máa wá. Àrònú tí ọ̀rẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Ìrònú púpọ̀ hypertension máa ló ń fà wá. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Òjò tó rọ̀ tó kún ìkòkò lágbàlá. Òjò ń lọ́rọ̀ sínú apẹ̀rẹ̀ tí kò dẹkùn. So ìkòkò wáyọ̀ wípé apẹ̀rẹ̀ ò lè mójò dání. Ẹ bá mi sọ fún kòkò pé kí kòkò má máa yọ̀ mọ́. Àsìkò ń bọ̀ wá fápẹ̀rẹ̀ bójò bá dá tán. Apẹ̀rẹ̀ ń bọ̀ wá kórè oko bójò bá ti dá. Ìgbà ẹ̀dá àsìkò ẹ̀dá wà lọ́wọ́ bàbá òkè. Àrònú tí ọ̀rẹ́ àsìkò rẹ̀ ń bọ̀ wá dé. Àrònú tí ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ mọ́lẹ̀ sí jó. Ayéfẹ́lẹ́ tún ti dé, àlùjọ tún ti dé. Bóyá wá kájọ ọjọ́ ìlú lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Hypertension ló lè ráyè bílù bá ní. Àlùjọ pọ̀ nínú ìlú mi ẹ̀ mọ̀ náà. Àrònú tí ọ̀rẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Ìrònú púpọ̀ hypertension máa ló ń fà wá. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Tó bá rí ṣe má ṣe pé pàdé ẹ lọ́lẹ̀. Because òní ti rí ọlá tún lè ṣàlàyé bẹ́ẹ̀ mọ́. Kò sówó lónìí owó ń bọ̀ bó dọ́là. Bí kò sọ́lá lónìí ọlá ń bọ̀ bó dọ́là. Àgàn má má bẹ̀rù mọ́ ọmọ ń bọ̀ wá. Àsìkò ẹ̀dá ìgbà ẹ̀dá wà lọ́wọ́ bàbá òkè. Then ìrònú púpọ̀ hypertension máa dẹ̀ ló ń fà wá. Àrònú tí ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ mọ́lẹ̀ sí Jésù. Ayéfẹ́lẹ́ tún ti dé, àlùjọ tún ti dé. Bóyá wá kájọ ọjọ́ ìlú lóyìn mọ́mọ́. Hypertension ló lè ráyè bílù bá ní. Àlùjọ pọ̀ nínú ìlú mi ẹ̀ mọ̀ náà. Àrònú tí ọ̀rẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Ìrònú púpọ̀ hypertension máa ló ń fà wá. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ó yá bẹ̀rẹ̀ wá kájọ ọjọ́. Bẹ́ẹ̀ èmi kọ́ Ọlọ́run ni o. Èmi kọ́ sẹ́ Ọlọ́run ni o. Èmi kọ́ Ọlọ́run ni o. Ó ní èmi kọ́ sẹ́ Ọlọ́run ni o. Orí mo mú wáyé orí owó ni. Orí mo mú wáyé orí ọlá ni. Orí mo mú wáyé orí ọmọ ni. Orí mo mú wáyé orí ọlá ni. Suku suku sabadibo. Suku suku sabadibo. Suku 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 sabadibo. Sele 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 mama. Suku 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 sabadibo. Suku 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 sabadibo. Suku suku sabadibo. Sele 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 mama. Sele 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 mama. Suku suku sabadibo. Suku suku sabadibo. Suku 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 sabadibo. Sele 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 mama. Suku 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 sabadibo. Suku 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 sabadibo. Suku suku sabadibo. Sele 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 mama. Sele 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 mama.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me? Can anyone hear me? All right, loud and clear. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again today for yet another Power BI case studies webinar session. So how are we doing, by the way? Let's have a little chat before just get to start. Good for now, okay? So we are live on YouTube as well. So if you're watching from YouTube, you can still drop in your questions on YouTube as well. So people that have the opportunity to be live on the Zoom call right now, we have the opportunity to ask the question. So basically, for you to have access to the Zoom link, you always you need to be registered on the Meetup channel. At the same time, you also probably have to be registered on the Power BI community page as well. All right, so for those who joined early, realize if you are Nigerian, if you are Yoruba especially, then I'm sure you are familiar with the music that was playing background before it started. So that was basically on purpose because I think I shared a tweet a couple of days ago that if you need to write DAX, then there is this certain music that you always have you need to play basically to allow your DAX to always flow as you want it, because I don't know, for some reason it just kind of like makes work easier. So maybe you might have to look something that clicks for you, but DAX is really not a child's play, and it's something that everybody needs to learn, whether you are ready for it or not, whether you want it or not. Just make sure you learn how to write DAX, whether you know it or not. Really, you just need to learn it, right? So it's part of the process. So I think today's session is going to be a lot on DAX, maybe not necessarily so much, but at least there'll be some interesting sprinkle of DAX in what we are about to cover today. So once again, welcome to Power BI Case Studies webinars. And this is something we try to hold at least once a month. The ideal time for holding this session is usually the last Saturday of every month. Sometimes we still try to push it earlier, and sometimes we miss our dates as well. But as much as possible, we try that. We want to try to make sure we run at least one session every month. And these are sessions that are always about real customers, case studies, real requests from customers. We just try as much as possible to make sure that we recreate the customer's requirements with maybe fictitious data or maybe something really close to the customer's data, but never do we use actual customer's data to run these sessions. And the objective of these sessions as well is to ensure that we are able to continue with our Power BI development, even though some of the sessions are always about, one case study or the other. I think the takeaway has to be the techniques that we use to solve these case studies, because not all case studies are going to be similar, but you are going to find yourself using, the different techniques that we learn to solve different other types of challenges that you may have. So for today, we are going to be looking at how do we create dynamic chart axes on Power BI. Like I said earlier, these are actually real clients' requirements, right? So clients' requirements can always be crazy. If you are a Power BI developer, then please make sure that you are always ready for anything. You are always ready for any kind of requirement. Sometimes some requirements make you to start wondering whether this makes sense or not. But guess what? Customer is always right, isn't it? So you always have to be prepared to answer whatever queries that clients want your reports to produce. So this particular case study really, I think, is not really something that is entirely new, but I feel like it's going to be worthwhile for us to go through the process of creating something like that here, because you find, like I said, the techniques are useful for you some other time. So my name is Ahmed Oyelowo, and I'll be the one to run through the entire session today. Time allotted for the sessions is usually anything between 2 to 3 hours, but guess what? We will never ever use 3 hours, and we may also not use 2 hours, because we need to try as much as possible not to overload the content. So Ahmed Oyelowo is my name once again, and I'm a Microsoft most valuable professional for the data platform. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, Microsoft certified educator, and managing partner for Foresight BI and Analytics Global Solutions. This is my fourth Power BI case study webinar session, and I'm really hoping that the next one is not going to be me. I'm only going to moderate the next case study session, right? So if we have anybody here who is ready to, give us something, give us an interesting client requirement or an interesting case study or the next case study webinars, please get in touch with me. I'm going to share my contacts at the end of this session. So are we ready to fire? Please be in DAX mode, be in Power Query mode, be in data visualization mode. Are we ready to fire? I would like to hear somebody else's voice, not just Ahmed's.
Yes.
Let me hear somebody else's voice.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, okay. we are.
Great. All right, so I'm excited. So let's go to look at Power BI and let's look at what we try to create today. So the idea really is for us to have a chart that is going to be dynamic in terms of the axis, right? So right now, for example, you see that I have this bar chart that is showing sales performance per region, and you can see the 4 regions, East, West, Central, and South. Now, when the user basically clicks on a different category right here, just happens that category is one of the categories that we are trying to that we are trying to analyze as well. The idea is once a user selects a different category, let this chart basically report by that different category. So I could change this to segment, for example, and you will see that, okay, now that doesn't work. Did I tamper with something? All right, so apparently I must have tampered with something. We are on the code right here, which is good, it's bad, but it's actually good because we get to create this live now. But the idea, I hope you understand what the idea is. If I choose category right now, I want my chart to show by category, right? So currently it's by region and it's showing Northwest, East, and South. When I change to category, I want to see my data categories now showing right here, okay? So it's a good thing that the code is not working right now. At the same time, it's also a bad thing. Generally, I think it's a good thing. So I hope you get the idea of what I'm trying to create, what we are trying to create here.
Yes.
Move on. All right, sweet. So like I always say that right now we are all consultants and we're trying to create this solution for the client. So I'm just going to open a fresh Power BI desktop file and walk through what we need to do. So just as I'm opening that up, let me see if I can quickly explain what the idea is once again. So basically, you can really use any data set for this particular one, but I think I'm going to use Superstore data really because it's about the simplest data you can find out there, but you can use any data set for this. Let me see. Let's send a chart to everyone with the Power BI with the Superstore data file. Superstore data, right? Okay, so I've sent Superstore data Excel file to the chat group. That's what I'm going to be using. Like I said, you can use any data set for this. What's really important is that you are able to follow through the entire process. Now, I always like to try to write processes down. I'm not sure if I got that covered right now, but we can still try to do something. So let's go to open whiteboard. We know what the idea is generally. Let's just try to table it in written format and see if we can work with that. Otherwise, we'll just work freestyle. So the idea once again is this. You have one big data table, for example, and from that data table, obviously, you know, from how, reporting is, or if you have attended any of my classes before, you know that you always analyze your report by some numbers and some categories, isn't it? Some numbers and some categories. So therefore, what you always use as slicers, or what you always use to filter your reports, what you always use as the fields that will be on the axis of your reports are always those categories, right? So if you have a big data table, for example, and you want to have options, like I showed on the Power BI, so you need to have options on what you want to analyze by. So these things basically are more or less like some headers in your data set, right? So I think let's bring in Superstore data before we continue. So let's bring in Superstore to this blank Power BI Excel workbook, Superstore data. Then let's connect to orders worksheets and transform data to go to Power Query. All right. So that's our data sets. And like I said, you always have categories like this, like this, like this, and then somewhere will have your numbers, right? So this sales quantity discount, these are the numbers. So now let's assume that we would like to be able to analyze this data in such a way that we want the likes of maybe subcategory category, that's 2, and then region, and maybe what else? Region and segments to be dynamic, right? So we want to be able to choose between all of those ones, right? So the idea is this: you have your big data table, right? So you have your table. So from this your table now, you need some select columns. Need some select columns that you want to use as slicers. Now, this select column that you want to use as slicers, the slicers really are supposed to be used to create dynamic axes for you, right? Okay. So in terms of the flow of work now, from this one big table, we are going to select a couple of columns. Now, those columns that you select, you are going to use them as dynamic axes for your chart, so that when you create your visualization, when you create your chart, you can choose to say this chart is by region, or you choose something else on your slicer and say this chart is by category, something like that, right? So that's the idea. These are the 3 big ideas of what we are going to try to implement. Now, if I go back to Power Query right now, I have my big table. Now, the next thing is, from this big table, I need my select column, right? So what are my select columns right now? I think, if I still remember, my select columns now are region, segment, category, and what was the last one? Who remembers the last one?
Sub-region.
Sorry? What's the last one?
Sub-region.
You mean, okay, so let's say subcategory, right? So that's it. The last one is subcategory, right? So these are the 4 things that we are going to try to select from the main data set. Now, if you know Power Query very well, then you know that there are always many ways to achieve the same thing, right? So like I said, the idea is to really teach techniques, right? Like behind the hood of the entire idea of solving the case study is for you to learn different techniques for solving different kind of problems. So, yeah, so one way is this. I need those columns. Someone could say, let's duplicate this, isn't it? Or what idea do you have? Since we are the same consulting team right now, what's your idea right now for isolating those columns alone somewhere else? You know, we need to use those guys as slicers. Any ideas what we could do? Gurus.
Hello, Ahmed.
Yes,
hello.
Please.
Yeah,
I can hear you.
I think we can recreate the others table. Then from that recreation, we can now take out those the slicers. We can retain them on those columns. Then take other columns out.
Okay, yeah, that's one idea. Any other idea? All right, now let's try to get something right now, isn't it? Let's try to get something right. If I go to this Power BI report, you are going to see that what I currently have as slicers are category, region, sales team, and segment. And really, we are changing this to something else. We are now using category, region, segment, and subcategory. Now, you know that before you can use anything as a slicer, that item really needs to be inside rows. It can't be a header. What do I mean by that? If I go to my data view for this particular data set right now, you know that if I want to use segments as a slicer, then what I'm going to be seeing inside the slicer are going to be like this item. So if I click on the drop down segment now, then the slicer for segment is going to contain consumer, corporate, and home office, which goes to mean that when I want to slice my report by consumer, corporate, and home office, I need to have all of these values inside a single column, isn't it? Now, what that means is if I'm going to create a report where I want to slice by category, region, segment, and so on and so forth, I need to have these items themselves inside a single column. Okay, so now the objective that we are going to try to achieve next is how to bring all these guys inside a single column. If I go to my Power Query, the first thing I want to do is I need to create a different table, really, that is going to have all those columns alone, right? Now, let's just play with small m right now. Now, even if I don't play with m, let's do this. If I go to Home on Power Query and I select Choose Columns, right? So choose columns, I want to say that I want segments, I want region, I want category and subcategory. These are the things that I want. If I click OK right now, what do you see? You see that Power Query really made use of this function to select all those columns, right? It uses table.select columns, and then it references the particular table, and then it lists out the columns that we need, right? Now I'm just going to delete that step because that's not what I want to do. So I'm deleting that step right now. And what I'm just going to do now, I will come to a new source in Power Query, and I'm going to write a blank query that is going to select all those columns from my orders table, right? So I want to select all those 4 columns. I want to select them from this my orders table. That's the idea, right? So I already know what to use. We use table.select columns to do something like that. So if I go to new source and I go to blank query, I can write my query as equal to table dot select select columns, open bracket. The first thing is, what's the table I want to select columns from? I want to select columns from the orders table, isn't it? Right? I want to select columns from this orders table, right? So I'm going to come to my function here and see I want to select column from the orders table, comma. Now the next thing is I need to list out all those columns that I want, right? So I'm going to open curly brace, then open a double quote and start typing the list of all those columns. So I want region, comma. I want segments, comma, I want category, comma, and I want subcategory. All right, so these are the 4 columns that I want from that table. So now you can see all those 4 columns from that table. Now doing this basically is going to ensure that we don't necessarily bombard the query with something, because what we could have done is to have duplicated this first orders table and then selected only these columns, right? But if we do that, you know, it will carry all the applied steps of that orders table. So in this case now, we only have one single step that has all these columns that we need right now, right? So now we have the 4 columns in question. The next thing is, remember that the idea is to be able to actually have these guys, all of these guys, we need them inside a single column so that we can actually use them as slicers. So what do you suggest we do to convert these headers now into columns? What do you think we can do to make them, you know, go upside down and go into a single column? What can we do? Any ideas?
On pivot.
On pivots, correct. Excellent. So we are just going to do an on pivot of this table so that we can twist it, so to say. So how do we on pivot this right now? I'm going to select just one column, any one column that I like. Then I can click Control A on my keyboard. That basically selects all the columns at once. Then I can do a right click on any of the headers, and I'm going to say unpivot these columns. Now I have the headers in a single column. I have the values in another column as well. So what I just want to do is, I think I would like to call this guy that is currently called attribute now, I want to call it header so that I can know what it is when I start to write my formula. So let's call this header now. So let's just call this header. So that's the header, and then this is the value. So if the header is region, some of the values in the region header are south, west, and so on and so forth, right? So I will just try to manage these names like this. So I'm always terrible with names. Everybody knows that. I'm always terrible with naming things, DAX, query, anything. Very terrible. So now, that's the headers, obviously. But guess what? Because we are actually coming from a real data table like this that contains transactions, and you agree with me that there will be multiple transactions for each of those headers, right? So for example, if you look at segments, technically, there are only 3 types of segments: consumer, corporate, and home office. There are only 4 types of regions. There is only central, east, south, and west. So for each one of those headers that we are currently looking at right now, they have a limited number of values or a limited number of unique values. But because we actually created this table now from a transaction table, you are going to see that some of those values are repeated. So for example, you have south here as a region. You also have south here as a region. These are repetitions. So if we do something like this, we still need to remove the duplicates. Okay, so I'm going to select one column again and Control A to highlight both columns. Do a right click, and I'm going to say we should remove duplicates. Okay, so right now everything kind of like scattered. This next step is really not necessary, but we just want to apply it for us to see what our table currently looks like. So I'm just going to click on the drop down of this my header, and I'm going to sort it ascending so that we can have all of the same headers together. Okay, so we have category, and the categories that we have are technology, furniture, and office supplies. We have regions, and the regions that we have are west, east, central, and south. We have segments as this, and so on and so forth. Now, I think we are ready to proceed. So let's rename this query. Like I said, I'm always very, very terrible with names. So can someone just give me a suitable name to call this table? Of course, we can't leave it as query 1. I have to give it something that makes sense.
Key.
Can you say that again?
Key.
I didn't catch that. Who caught that? Can you send it to chat?
Okay.
Key. Okay, somebody says key. Any other idea? If I don't get any other idea, dynamic slicer. Somebody says dynamic slicer. What else? Okay, so we have 2 options. We have key and we have dynamic slicer. So from key and dynamic slicer, what should we go for? Somebody says dimensions. Okay, I think I like dimensions, isn't it? Okay, so I think I like dimensions. So let me just veto dimensions. Okay, so I veto dimensions. So let's call this table dimensions. After all, if you want to see your chart in a different dimension, what do? Click on something within the slicer, right? I want to see it from the dimension of category. I want to see it from region dimension, segment dimension. So let's call this dimensions. Thank you for that suggestion. So now I think we're ready to go. I'm just going to click close and apply. Okay, so now let's put on our modeling and our DAX hats. You can remove the Power Query hat now, turn your DAX and modeling hats. Okay. So we have our two tables. We have the main data table, which is the orders. We have the dimensions table, which we want to select something from. Now, if I go to the model view, you are going to see that these two tables are independent of one another. There is no relationship. In fact, there can't be any relationship, because what's going to be your key now? If you want to relate these two tables together, realize that there is nothing to relate them with, because on the dimensions table now, these are, so-called dimensions table right now, we have a mixture of values that is coming in from several columns, right? So technology, furniture, and office supplies, those guys are coming from category column. East, Central, South, and West, they are coming from the region column, right? So we have different values right now coming from different columns of our data. So technically, we can't create any relationship. We can't really create any relationship, except you want to create multiple relationships to each one of those columns, which I can't really tell you what's going to happen if you try to do something like that. Okay, so now let's go back to the report view and let's start to create the skeleton of what our output is going to look like. So the first thing is this: let's create our slicer, and in that slicer we are going to include the header as the slicer item, isn't it? So that we can have category, region, segment, and subcategory just like we wanted. Let's go increase the size to make this more legible. Size 20, and also let's also put some let's put some shadows to make it different from the other slide. From the other charts that we have. So that's that. So you have your category, region, segment, and subcategory. Now I'm going to create, let me just untick this first. So nothing is currently selected. I'm going to create a table now that is going to have the values, right? So you can see how the filtering is going to work. So these values as well, let's take that also as size 20. Now you can see that currently you have a mixture of many things, isn't it? Accessories, appliances, art, binders, these really are like subcategories, but guess what? East is a region, right? Consumer is a segment. So they all belong to one of each of these headers. So until I click on category alone now, then I'm going to see only the values that belong to the category header, right? If I click on region, I'm going to see the regions, click on segments, and so on and so forth, right? So right now, the skeleton works exactly as we want, because if I change this to a chart now, this is currently a table, but the behavior is going to be exactly the same thing if I change it to a chart, except, for you to create a chart, you must have both axes and you must also have values. But right now, the only thing I have on my table is axis, right? And you can see that it works correctly. No issues right now. Now, let's go and introduce the problem. Shadow. So let's introduce the problem. I know you have an idea what the problem is. Yeah, so this class is live on YouTube, which means the recording is always available. You can always rewatch the session again on YouTube. So who can guess what the next problem is going to be now? Considering the fact that if I go to my model view, I currently have all my selection from dimensions, but guess what? I'm going to have to report numbers from my orders table. And you know that these two tables are not related. In fact, they cannot be related. So if they cannot be related, how will I be able to show, for example, the sales for each of these categories. I cannot show the sales of furniture, office supplies, and technology. You know, that's going to be a problem, right? So right now, this is my table. I have values from there as furniture, office supplies, and technology. If I go to my orders table, for example, and I just say I want to report all of these values by sales, then you'll see that it doesn't really break it down because the sales numbers can't be mapped to these guys because these guys are coming from a different table entirely. Okay, they're coming from a completely different table, and these two tables are not related. So let's start by, writing simple measures just for a start. Okay, so I'm currently making use of the sales column, and I would like to just write a simple sum of sales measure so that we can build on that as we try to solve this problem. So I'm going to do a right click on anywhere really, because measures doesn't really depend on the table where they are stored really, right? Depends on what you have written in your formula. So I can write a measure and keep it on the dimensions table. I can write a measure and keep it on the orders table. Okay, so I just want to replace this explicit sales measure here. I want to replace it with an implicit formula that I'm going to write, right? I can right click on the dimension side since it has a smaller number of values, so I can easily locate my measure. So I'll create a new measure now, which I'm going to call total sales. So let's call this total sales, and it's just going to be a simple sum of my sales. Easy. Yeah, so somebody, Dinesh wants to know if we can get this video on YouTube. Yes, the video is going to be on YouTube. It's already streaming live there now, and it's going to be kept there. So total sales is my measure. So I'm just going to bring in the total sales into this, my table. So just tick total sales there. I have it on my table. You see, they're exactly the same thing. So I can remove the explicit one now, right? No, the implicit one. Yeah, I just wrote the explicit one and the one I have control over. So I can remove the implicit sales and I'll be left with the explicit one of total sales, which is the sum of sales. And we understand, even though I change this now to region, I'm going to be seeing that different regions as it is, but it's always going to report, the same values, right? No matter how much I change this, it will always be the same. And we understand the fundamental reason for this, because the things I'm trying to report the numbers by, they don't belong to the same table. They belong to different tables, right? Even if they belong to different tables, naturally, if those two tables are related, then we can have the right figures. So that's the fundamental problem. It's not showing correctly for me because the dimension I'm reporting by doesn't belong to the same table where I have my numbers. And that's where we're going to make use of a DAX function that allows you to actually kind of like map something that is not related to a table. I want to map that thing to that table. Let me say that again. A DAX function that is going to allow you to map something that doesn't belong to a table. You are going to map it to that table. Okay? So for example, when I choose category right now, you see I have furniture, office supplies, and technology, right? Ideally, if I go to my orders table right now, let me go to data view and I go to my orders table. I have one of those columns on my orders table that is called, what am I showing again? Let me use region as an example, right? Everybody understands this. Now, I have a column on my orders table that is called region. So if I go to this is my column now, this is my region column, and you see that it has the same central, east, south, and west. It has it, really. But because the central, east, south, and west that I'm using on this report right now is actually from a different table. So what I need to do is I need to make use of that my DAX function now. I need to use it to map the central, east, south, and west that is coming from the dimension tables. I need DAX, or I need Power BI to actually see it as if it's coming from the others table. Do we understand that logic? Does it make sense? All right. So let me just show you visually what I mean by that. Let me show you visually. Now, if I remove this, you know, you are looking at central, east, south, and west right now. Okay, let me just create two of them, right? So let me duplicate this. This is one that is not working. Okay, I'm going to do Control C, Control V. I have a second one, right? Now, if you look at the first one that is not working right now, it is not working because my central, east, south, and west is coming from this table, right? Meanwhile, my sales is coming from a different table. Sales is coming from here. You see, there is a disconnect. There is a disconnect, right? My sales is coming from others table. My central, east, south, and west is coming from a different table. Now, because of that disconnect, you see that the answers are not going to be correct. It's not going to break it down, okay? So for this second one, for example, I'm going to remove this value from there, and I'm going to use the region. You know, the sales is coming from the others table. So I'm going to bring the region that is also coming from the others table, right? Let me just flip this. So you see that this one works, right? The second one works because the region I'm using here is coming from the same table where the sales is coming from. This other one is not working because the region I'm using here is not coming from the same table where the sales is. That's why it is not working. So what we need to do is we have to, you know, use DAX in such a way that we can tell DAX that, excuse me, DAX, you see the values that you are seeing here, right? I know I'm using it from a different table entirely, but please, when I'm using it for this calculation, just assume that I am actually picking the one from the original table itself, right? We want to, what do you call that thing in Nigerian English again? What do you call that thing again? We want to disguise, yes, we want to disguise it. We want to disguise this central, east, west, and region. We want to disguise it like it's coming from the others table so that it can actually work correctly, okay? Now, the idea is, you know, by the time we're able to disguise that, if we're able to disguise this region, we'll also be able to disguise the segment as well. We'll also be able to disguise the subcategory. So we can basically just disguise each of these guys as if they were actually coming from the original table. Okay, so let's just remain with our region alone. So for us to be able to do this, obviously, we need to, you know, create a different variant of these total sales. We need to create a variant that is going to assume that region is actually coming from the others table and not from this dimensions table. And the DAX function that can allow you to, that kind of disguise really is a function called, treats as. Okay, so we are going to treat this guy, we are going to treat these regions as these ones, right? Or to put it another way, we are going to treat the regions that is coming from this dimensions table as if they were coming from the others table. That's the idea, okay? So let's go and create our measure a modified version of this total sales measure. So right click, new measure. So I'm just going to call this measure, for the sake of time now, won't put this name to democracy. I'm just going to use the bad name as usual. Let's call this mod sales now. Okay, so this is modified sales. And guess what? We know one very powerful function in DAX that can allow you to change things anyhow you like. That function is called calculate, isn't it? So we're going to say that we want to calculate our total sales. But right now, we are telling DAX that we understand that we are actually reporting by regions right now, but the regions we are reporting by actually does not belong to the same table. So we want to tell DAX that, yes, we know they don't belong to the same table, but please just treat it as if it's coming from the same table, okay? So that's where treat as basically comes in. So for our filter now, we are going to introduce treat as our filter. So treat as. The first argument in treat as is basically the expression and what you want to treat it as, okay? So for now, let's start by going with the list of everything that we have on the value side, right? That's where you have your central, east, south, and west, right? So we are going to use values to extract the list of what is on the dimension column called value. You know, the header is where you have category, region, segment, subcategory. The value is where you have something like central, east, south, and west when you pick region, right? When you pick segment, you have different values, okay? So we want all these values right here, comma, and we basically want to map them to the region column that is on the orders table. Okay, so now I'm going to close brackets and I'm going to close brackets like that. I have a new formula called modified sales, where I have now successfully disguised the values as if they were actually the regions that is coming from the original table, right? So now let's add that modified sales now to this table. So add modified sales right there. And we are going to see that the modified version of sales now works. Why does it work? It works because right now, in the first instance, we're just using ordinary total sales, ordinary sum of sales. Now, this ordinary sum of sales cannot be accurately calculated for central, east, south, and west, because this central, east, south, and west is coming from a different table, right? So we created a modified version of that sales, whereby this central, east, south, and west can be seen as if they were coming from the original table, right? So I'll show you the DAX measure once again. This is the modified sales, and we say calculate total sales. Then we really just want to treat all those values. So the values right now are central, east, south, and west. We want to treat them as if they were actually the original region columns on the main orders data table. Okay, and you see that that currently works. If I change it to category, obviously, the modified side is not going to work. If I change to segment, it's not going to show. If I change to subcategory, it's not going to show, because the values I currently mapped is what? Is the region values. I've correctly mapped the region values to the region column. I need to also map category to category column, map segment to segment column, and subcategory to subcategory column as well. Okay, I know this is DAX, and I know it can really spin heads, but if I get a couple of people that can tell me to proceed, I'll gladly proceed. So can we proceed?
You can proceed.
All right. Okay, so thank you. Great. So now let's proceed. Let's proceed. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me remove the bad one now. Let me remove, not like it's bad. Let me remove the one that doesn't work from this table. Okay. Let's remove the total sales and let's leave the mod sales now. Mod sales, the one that currently works. Now let's go back to form. Let's see if we can zoom this, Control plus plus plus. All right, so now I've correctly mapped the values to region column. Okay, but that's when I select region. What if I select category? Obviously, if I select category, then I need to map the values to category. If I select segment, I need to map the values to segments. So what we are going to do is we are going to try to modify this output formula. We're going to modify it by creating opportunities for mapping each of our headers to the right places. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add extra lines at the bottom here where I'm going to create different variables for mapping each header correctly. Okay, so let's use a variable and let's create our first mapping. So the first mapping, let's just use the first one we created and let's call it a region map. Okay, we want to map the region from the disconnected table to the main table. So can always refer to that dimension table as a disconnected table because it doesn't connect to the data table, but we want to map them together as applicable. So region map is going to be equal to, this is what we use to do the mapping. Okay, just copy this like this and use it here. I know that anytime I click on region, then it's going to map the values to the region column. Okay, now let's copy. Okay, so we have the formula copied. Go to the next line, VAR, create a category map as, just paste that same formula. We'll come back to edit it. Create a segment map, paste that, and then create a sub-category map and dump that. So we have the four maps, isn't it? And I'm very sure that you know exactly what to do from here. The region map, anytime region is selected, is going to map the values to the region column. Anytime category is selected, it should map the values to the category column. So let's change this to what? Let's change this to category. Okay, anytime segment is selected, it should map the values to segments. Okay, and anytime subcategory is selected, should map the values to subcategory on the main data table. Okay, so these are the mappings, really. Okay, now the formula still works. I just need to come here and say return right here. Okay, you know, when you use variables, you have to return what the output is going to look like. Okay, so if I check this right now, don't be discouraged. Already you know that it's going to work for region, but it's not going to work for the other guys. Only region works. Only region works right now because my output is still using the mapping when region is selected. It's not yet using the mapping when the other things are selected. Okay, so first of all, if I remove this one now, you agree that this guy is exactly the same thing as this guy that I've currently created as what? That I've created as a variable. So actually, if I remove this one and I just use a variable name instead. So I can just come here and use region map, right? If I use region map like that, and I check that, you see that the region formula still works, right? The category is not going to work. Segment won't work. Only region works. So the idea is that we need to now change this formula right now to something whereby when region is selected, let it be region map. When category is selected, you see, I even don't know how to spell. When category is selected, let this, instead of it being region map, let it be category map, okay? And when any other thing is selected, let this automatically just be whatever is selected. So obviously, the next thing we need to find out is, let's know what is always being selected, right? So let's go and define another variable that can always let us know which header is actually currently selected, right? So let's call this selected header. It's going to be equals to the switch function called selected value. So which value? I want to have whatever is selected on my dimension header, right? So this variable will always show us what is currently selected. So the idea now is we need to change this formula right now to something that shows like when the selected header is region, then let this work exactly as it is. But when the selected header is category, then let this one not be region map, let it be category map, like that. And when the selected header is segment, then don't let it be like this, let it be segment map, right? Something like that, okay? So it's more or less like conditions, really, conditional statement. Now, this conditional statement now is in multiples, right? So, and you know the DAX function that you use to specify multiple conditions easily is what? Is the switch function. Okay, now we are basically looking at how many functions now. Treat as we've seen selected value. You know that treat as allows you to map something that is connected, to map it as if it is actually connected, right? You know that selected value helps you to get what is being selected inside the visual. Now I want to look at the switch function that allows you to specify multiple conditions. So it's going to be switching from one condition to the other, okay? Of course, we've looked at calculate that needs no introduction. Calculate just allows you to modify your formula in a way that you can define what is actually being built at, right? So, next thing, this formula is too static. It can only work for one thing at a time. So, we want to switch it to something that works based on condition. So, I'm just going to cut out the formula right now because I'm still going to make use of it. So, let's just cut it out, Control X, and then we are going to return our output now as a switch. It needs to switch according to whatever is being selected. See, switch. Switch. First argument is expression. That is what is going to be the trigger for my switch, right? What's going to cause me to switch to something else? So what's going to cause this formula to switch to something else right now is what? Is whatever header is selected. So switch, first argument is selected header, okay? Now, when the selected header changes to something else, then the DAX has to switch to a different one, something like that, okay? So switch first argument is selected header. That's going to be a trigger for the switch. So I'm going to put a comma, and the next argument for switch is value 1. That is, what's the first switch that I'm going to work on? And then the next argument is the result 1, right? So if it's on that value, this is the result I should show, right? If I put a comma now, you see result 1. Put another comma, you see value 2, result 2, and so on and so forth, right? So the value 1 now is, the formula should start maybe, for example, if the selected header is, assuming, category, that's the value 1, then the result has to be what? I'm just going to paste what I copied. The result is going to be calculate total sales based on the segment map, right? So we have, if you choose category, then let your total sales run based on the categories that we have mapped. So we are going to use mapped, call it category map, isn't it? So category map. Remember why we did the mapping? Because the categories really are coming from a different table. So if I want to see the total sales for those categories, they are actually not connected. I'm carrying a category from a different table, and I want to run the total sales from an entirely different data table. These two tables, they don't talk to one another. They are not related. They are disconnected. They are not in a relationship. So actually use the treat as right here to tell DAX that, you know, anytime I'm choosing the values of my categories from this, my disconnected table, please just assume that it is actually coming from the original table, right? So now we are returning our output to say, when you choose, when the selected header is category, please calculate the total sales and make sure you can filter it by the categories that we have mapped right there. All right, I'll put a comma there. I'll go to my value 2. Now you can switch it as well. You can also switch to a different formula if I have actually selected region as my selected header. If I've selected region as my selected header, then calculate my total sales and filter it by what? Filter it by my region map. Okay, that's how I'm basically going to complete this now. So if you choose segments instead, then calculate my total sales and filter it by my segment map. And finally, if I choose sub category, then do that calculation and use my subcategory map. All right, so that's that. Close my switch, check the formula, and check the report. So if I choose category, I see changes and the numbers also change. Segment changes and the numbers also change. Now I'm very sure that my formula works. The next thing is really, I just want to use a chart. So I just want to use a bar chart. So I can easily just convert this table into a bar chart like that. Not like it has anything to do with the results, but we just had to use the table for us to see what's actually happening there. And then the next thing is really for you to do your fancy stuff as you wish. You can do your fancy stuff. Technically, it's all done and completed. Just before I ask whether you understand it or not, let's ask first if there is a question, if there's any question. Huh? Questions? Yeah. So I don't know, I'll just call you Roy. So Roy says this helps to cut down many-to-many relationships, right? Yes, I would say it actually helps to cut down more or less like inactive relationships, you know, plenty inactive relationships. And then your visual is also light and everything is just crystal smooth and clear. Any questions? Questions? How heavy was this? How heavy was this? Not heavy from Dinesh. Yeah, I'm sure Dinesh is a guru. So for a calendar relationship with a revenue table, let me see. What do you mean by that? So for Anita, it's like pounded yam.
Yeah, hi. This is Roy, and I was posting this question. Can I go ahead?
Hi, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'll tell you the scenario, the use case out here. So we have a revenue table, a very heavy table, and we need to cut that out depending on month, quarter, and year, right? Typical financial statements, right? And for that, when we tried to create that, it was coming many-to-many relationships and getting very heavy, and the vision was taking time to load. So I think that the technique that is showed now, can I use that? I'm going to create a calendar table which has no relationship with the revenue table as such. And I create this, variables and the street as. Then the reason why it was so heavy because of this many-to-many relationship, high cardinality, that will be reduced, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so like you rightly said, this will work perfectly for a calendar table where you basically probably want to switch. You want to switch from showing by month, you want to show by quarter, you want to show by day, by week, or anything like that. You know, your year, month, quarters, days, those are all different columns. And what you always have to do is you need to have this setup of this kind of table, whereby on the header side, you're going to have like years. Maybe you have 5 years of data, for example. Then you will have your 5 years of data right now. So you have year. You have your years. You now have months. You have your January, February, March, April, up to December. You have your quarters. You have it like that. So at the end of the day, when you are doing your reporting, now come back to your measure, and you are going to use treat as to ensure that you are actually mapping those values back to your main date table or to your main calendar table that has a relationship to your main fact table. So it works in that scenario as well.
And it keeps a visual light too, right? So it does not take that time to load. It doesn't impact the performance.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, this is real magic band one for us, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I think the takeaway for me is that first you have to understand that when two tables are not connected, it becomes impossible for you to report different things from the two tables, right? Now, for this kind of scenario now, whereby you can't even try to set up a relationship between these two tables. Not like you can try, but it's going to be very horrible. So it's not something you want to try to do. Then your options or your option now is for you to actually treat the values on this table as if they were actually coming from this other table, right? Now, if we had just one single column, for example, then we'll just basically just relate them together with our lives, right? So as it being, for example, on this my dimension table, all I have is technology, office supplies, and furniture. If this is all I had, then it would have just been easy for me to create a relationship between the two tables. Then I can report by technology alone. I can't use a slicer to switch to choose a different column header. Okay, now because I want to be able to choose different column headers, like I want to choose category and let me show my report by these things. I want to choose region and show my report by these things like that. Then I'm going to make sure that anytime I choose category here, right? So if I choose category like this, let me just choose category. So when I choose category like this, I want to assume that these values are actually the same values as if I go to my orders table and I go to the category column. So if I go to the category column somewhere there, right? So these are categories. You see, we have furniture, office supplies, and technology. So the idea is, I know when I choose category, that category is going to be coming from this my dimensions table, which, as we have said, is not connected to the orders table at all. They are both separate. So we want to do something whereby when I choose category right here, I want to assume that these values, they are actually coming from the categories on the main orders table right here. I want to assume that they are coming from here. That's the idea. So if I assume they are coming from here, then my numbers can report properly. And that's why on our measure, the first thing we did was to do all those mappings, right? So we want to map the values to the regions. We want to map the same values to the category, map the same values to segment, map the same values to our subcategory. Now, how do we know which of these things to use to port? We first of all want to find out, what did we select? What did we select? If we select category, then let it work according to the mapping we did for category. If you select region, let it work according to the mapping we did for regions, and so on and so forth. Right? So we are supposed to have a part 2 of this where we take it a step further, right? So, but actually very important for us to combine those two things inside this one single class, because this one alone can be very, very heavy. But I hope that this has really helped you to pick up some additional skill sets. It has also helped you to pick up some additional techniques that you can use in building your reports. Now you can always, create dynamic axes just as you wish. All right. So here we have one measure that is sum of sales. If I want to see count order ID based on dimension which is created, how will it be working? All right. So right now we are using sales, but really this can always be anything. Can always be anything. Right. So right now, for example, I'm using total sales. I'm using this based on total sales. If it wasn't based on total sales, if it was based on something else, maybe it was based on, maybe let's say number of orders, isn't it? Like transaction volume, right? So I could come here, maybe create a new measure. Let's call this measure transaction volume. This is transaction volume, and let's assume that for our transaction volume, we are actually counting the order IDs, right? Maybe let's use count A of the order IDs. So that's the transaction volume. And if I change this report, I remove mod sales and I use transaction volume, you see that is going to give us the same numbers across, right? Because my transaction volume right now is going to expect that this segment that I'm currently using here should come from the same table where I'm counting the order IDs from, or at least have a relationship with that table. But as we said it, there is no relationship. So all you just have to do is to always try to use this same pattern of mod sales. So we are going to create a different one for the transaction. I'm just going to copy this pattern, Control A, Control C, and I'm going to use another very terrible name. As always, let's use mod transaction volumes now, right? So this is going to be mod maybe transaction volume. right? And all I have to change here is my calculate, right? Now I'm calculating total sales. Now I want to calculate total, I want to calculate transaction volume based on those mapping, okay? So what I'll do is I'll just change all the instances of total sales here. I'm going to change them to transaction, right? So if I select one total sales, you see, it kind of like highlights all the totals that we have. I'll just use F2, Control F2 really, Control F2 to highlight all of them together. I'm going to type transaction volume right there. All of these sales, I don't need them. Once I select one, I have all of them highlighted. I'm going to use Control F2 to highlight all of them together. Then I'm going to backspace to hit them all together and check this formula like that. And then if I come to my charts, transaction volume doesn't work because it needs to assume that everything is from the same table. I remove that and I use my mod transaction volume where I have mapped things according to how it should have been mapped. Now change this region, change this category, right? So this more or less like a pattern really that you can use repeatedly. All you have to do is to change your, let's call it the base measure now to what scenario you are working with. So if I had like 7 categories, for example, then I need to do 7 mappings, right? I'm just going to have to create 3 extra mappings right here, and I'm going to include those 3 extra switches in my turn side of my DAX measure. So I think this is a pattern that you can use and use if you have a scenario like this, right? So just one more thing, just to round this up. One more thing is, of course, when you have something like this, you don't want to use this kind of title. You don't want to use more transaction volume by value, right? You want to use something like, let it show, for example, sales by segment, right? So if I choose region, let it show sales by region. If I choose category, let it show sales by category. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a measure for our title, right? So create a new measure, which we're just going to call anything, call it charts. You can call it anything, charts, title, and it's going to be, since I want sales by anything you select here, sales by anything you select here, that means my measure needs to look like this. Double quotes, sales by, I put a space, I put a double quote, sales by what? Sales by anything you select here. So I'm going to join this sales by. I'll use the ampersand function to join it. Sales by, join that to anything I select as my header, isn't it? Anything I select as my header, right? So sales by, if I choose category, show sales by category. So just mark that formula. Chart title is there right now. And if I put that on a card visual, if I put it on a card visual, chart title, you see it shows sales by category. If I change it to region, it shows sales by region. Segment, it shows sales by segment. However, we're not going to leave it on the card. We need to make use of it as the title right here. So we need to format these charts. We need to format the title. This is the title. This is what it currently shows. We need this to be dynamic, right? So we have to use the conditional formatting to make it dynamic. So click on this FX, and we want the title to be based on a dynamic formula. And the formula is going to be a field value. The field is going to be that measure I created called chart title, and click OK to show me now sales by segment. Let's make this 25. Sales by segment. What if I choose region? Sales by region, category, and so on and so forth. Now, just to match what I had here, right? If I want to include this, this, should I call it emoticon? Should I call it emoji? Or what can we do this now? Just want to include right there we're just going to take advantage of the Windows shortcuts for showing emojis, right? So I want that emoji before the sales. So the Windows shortcut is Windows full stop, right? So Windows full stop will always show you these emojis. I'm just going to type, for me, I want a cat. I want a cat. So select that cat right there, check that. And then my title will always look like this. So sales by that, sales by that. So let me see what we have in charts. Here we have one measure that is sum sales. So I want count of order ID based on dimensions. I think that with sum of sales, I want to see with sum of sales. Can you explain what you mean by with the sum of sales?
Yeah, this is
Do you
the name.
mean?
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
see the two measures in the single chart. Actually, I want to see based on the region sum of sales and order quantity in the single chart.
Okay, so maybe I didn't get that completely correctly, because I think that the first one we did was actually based on sum of sales, which was modified sales. The only thing we did was, because we already had a measure for sum of sales somewhere total sales, so we just reference that total sales. Really, you could actually use sum of sales right here instead of total sales, right? Just use sum sales, something like that, right? Or maybe what you really want to see is maybe
actually in the furniture has two bars, and the single bar is for quantity and another bar
you
is,
want to use maybe like a clustered bar like this, isn't it?
okay.
A clustered bar where you can actually see two things, like
shall I select mod cells? Yeah,
where you can see two different things.
Yeah, I want to see that like this. Yeah,
it's gonna work. You just need to
okay. I have one more doubt. I have one more doubt. Can we create the particular table as a measure tables called sales quantity customer ID? We can create the separate table based on the dimensions. For example, I have to create one more tables like sum of sales, count of quantity. If I click sum of sales from the message table, it will should show only sum of sales.
Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Okay, so
I have two slices. That is the headers. That is a dimension. Yeah, different slicer is measures. Okay. If I click category from the dimension in the message table, I have to select sum of sales. The sum of sales should show. If I click order quantity, it will show order quantity. It is possible.
Yeah, I get that. All right. So I think what you need to do for that is, first of all, write your sales that works. Done that. Write your quantity that works. You've also done that as well. So the next thing you now need to do is you are going to have to create, because this is not a dimension now. This is going to be like a measure selection, right? It's like a
measure selection.
Measures naturally are supposed to be like
sales
numbers.
and
So
orders.
I could quickly, so I could quickly go to say Power Query and do enter data and just create two selections, right? So I can use let's say measure selection, and then here I can have sales, and here
orders.
I can have let's just call this volume, right? Let's call it volume.
A transaction volume.
Okay. Yeah. So now, if you like, you could number it 1 and 2, 1 and 2. I like to do this just to make my formula easy to write. So now I know that 1 is sales and 2 is volume. 1 is sales, 2 is volume. So I can call this measure.
Okay.
Maybe let's call it measures. I know you are not disappointed with my naming because I've given you caveats. I name badly. Okay, so now obviously you know that you can't call anything measures because measure is a reserved name, right? So if you try to call a table measures, this is what's going to come out. It's going to come out as measures 2. Okay, so obviously my naming is really terrible. So let's rename it properly. Name as selected measure should work. Or maybe selected I don't know.
Attributes.
Sorry. So sorry.
It's not an issue. It's not.
Oh, let me use summary. Selected summary. I think that's going to work. Selected summary will make more sense. So finally, I get something. Selected summary.
Okay.
Doesn't apply. Right. So this is just going to be a simple case of if, or maybe switch if you like. Right. Once I have more than one condition, I always prefer to use switch. So now if you have this one right there, and then I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste. And for this one, see. So for this second one now, I want to use not the header now. I want to use my selected summary, right? Which is a measure selection. Really, this should actually be summary. Okay. So if I choose sales here, I want the values here to sales. If I choose volume, I want the values here to be volume. I already have the sales and the volume.
If I select both sales and volume, it should show both values.
Okay. Okay. In that case, you need to use these charts. Okay. Let's see how that's going to be possible. So let's do a new measure. And let's say summary measure is going to be called to switch what now? Switch selected summary. Selected. Now I don't like this.
Selected summary is a table name, correct?
Yeah, so first, let's find out first. Let's use PR and let's say selected summary. Select summary equals to selected value. My selected summary selection is just selection, right? So when I choose sales, it's going to know I've chosen sales. When I choose this, it's going to know I've chosen that. Okay. Now let's now do the outputs as a return of. I'm going to use a switch. I'm going to say selected summary. If the selected summary, if that happens to be sales, then it should show me the modified sales, right?
Yeah.
And then that happens to be, what's the other guy called? Volume. Then let that be modified transaction, right? And check. Is a table name and cannot be blah 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 blah. Was this selected summary? All right, I chose the right one. Maybe it's the name of the table, same name as variable. So let's use selected sum.
Okay.
So selected sum now, check. So now, if I remove this mod sales and I use my summary measure there, I choose volume, shows volume. If I choose sales, it shows sales. Now you say if you choose both, you want to see both, isn't it? Aha. So now there comes one complication. So let's see, how can we make that happen? If you choose both, then you want to see both. Okay, maybe let's put in the modified sales and also put in modified transaction value. Now they both show. Okay. Let's see. Bring back modified transaction.
Summary measure.
Yeah, summary measure. So this summary measure right now really has already combined the two of them.
Yeah, it's
right?
working fine without one selection, with one selection.
Yeah, you already combined the two. And we need a situation where really on this chart, for two bars to show, you need two things on the values, right? So each value you have here is one bar, isn't it?
Okay.
Each value you have is a bar. So we need to be able to now create a different value here that is strictly going to show that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so let's see if we're able to resolve this within the time frame, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll probably just do a video on that if I'm able to resolve it offline.
Okay.
So why is it two of them showing modified
Can we get the link for this video?
Can we get what?
Can we get the YouTube link for this
Sure.
video?
Yeah, sure. So let me see if I can even get that right away. Yeah, did you register on the Meetup group, right? So if you're registered on the Meetup group, I'm going to share the YouTube recording on Meetup. I'll share that as a message to all attendees. So you always have that recorded. Yeah. So on this, I want transaction volume. I want mod sales. If I have the two of them there, they are both showing, and the control shows here. Sales select so transaction starts. Initial outputs to that. Final output is to say that if selected value selected some selection to sales, then this should be blank. Wise initial outputs. Check. That's it. Yeah, right. Okay. So I'll probably just do a YouTube video to quickly explain because right now. That's the logic we are basically going to have to use. Just to control the transaction volume side, we're basically going to control both of them, right? Such that if sales is selected from this side, then let it actually show a blank. Otherwise, let it show you a value. So I'll just do a different YouTube follow-up to this to explain this concept. All right. So thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, it's a pleasure. So thanks for joining today's case study session. We'll see you again next week. Sorry, not next week. It has to be next month. All right?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So can we have a small chat? Anytime.
Yeah, I just wanted one more question. Shall I or shall I keep it to myself? I mean, it's over the time, I understand.
No, you can ask. We still have like 8 minutes, really. Have 8 minutes.
Okay, so actually what I wanted to add is that if I copy the data in a separate table altogether, you know, the dimensions table, if it has a huge amount of data, last 3 years data, right? Huge amount of data, will it not make my data set heavy?
Yeah, it's actually possible because what we just basically did for this one, you know, we use a Power Query technique, right? So, but what you could actually do is to maybe not use Power Query. If you have fixed value, dimensions are usually fixed anyway. They are always fixed in most cases, right? You have your fixed number of categories, you have a fixed number of regions and stuff like that. So maybe what you could do is, you know, just create a small table aside. Maybe it could be as a result of copy and paste, you know, if you enter data in Power Query like that, just enter data, can basically copy something and paste in here. So for example, I'm just going to right click here. I'm going to say P table. So I can do enter data. You can copy from anywhere. It can be from Excel. So you can generate all that fixed values that you to use as your, you know, as your dimensions, and then come here and paste. As long as it doesn't exceed, I think, around 3,000 cells, you can use this copy and paste feature. Then you can load this, and I'm very sure that since there are dimensions, it's not going to be heavy because there are dimensions. Except you have maybe a really large amount of dimension, maybe like 10.
No, I got it. You're right. No, you're right. Dimensions are always limited. It's a transactional data which is huge. So this is basically containing my dimensions, right? Thank you so much. You know, it's just a calendar might get really huge, right? The calendar might get really huge, or is it will be year, month, weeks, right? It won't be.
A calendar will not really be huge because depending on the level you are going to on the calendar, right? So I think the highest thing you can have on calendar that can be huge is if you have days, because for days you are going to have 365 of them, right? So if you are filtering by days, right? But if you are filtering up to week level, then that will be the highest thing you have because you have 52 weeks, right? So you have 52 weeks, you have 5 years, so 52 weeks is going to be like 52 rows. Plus, maybe you have 10 years of data. So 52 rows plus 10 rows for the 10 years. Then you have 12 months plus 12 months. You still have less than 100 rows in total for 10 years of data where you are filtering up to week. So it's really can be huge for a dimensions.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I wish you could do personal consulting also. I would have really approached you. But anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. All right. So please make sure you are registered on Meetup group so that you can always get the links to the recording after the class. So what I'm going to do is I'll just quickly for the Meetup group so that you can sign up there. Right, so I can share these to chats, right? If you haven't joined Meetup, please join Meetup. Should also join Power BI Case Studies group, community, on the Power BI community as well. I think the only challenge with that really is you need to have an organization account. You can't use your personal account for it. So I'm going to share that. Once you join the meetup, I'm just going to try as much as possible to send that message twice. So people who have joined in already are going to get that message right after this webinar. We'll have the link to the recording. If you join in later, then I'm going to send a different message tomorrow as well. Okay, so my parting words right now is that you need to go and learn DAX. You need to start learning DAX. Whether you know it or not, it doesn't matter. Whether it makes sense to you right now or not, it really doesn't matter. Just make sure that you start to do something with DAX, right? All right, so I'm just going to wind down the clock till 9 o'clock. Anybody that wants to chat, you can start chatting right now. Stop YouTube live and also